As the division rounded the bend and entered Surigao Strait, the hearts of their sailors sank to the pits of their stomach as they saw what lay in wait. American cruisers and battleships were lined up, many of them Pearl Harbor veterans out for revenge. The resulting battle would destroy much of the Japanese division and sent one quiet battleship to the bottom with no victories under her belt. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Fuso, which comes from the word Fusong, a classical name for Japan, was the eldest sister of the battleship Yamashiro, and she was laid down in the Kure Naval Arsenal on March 11, 1912 to be built for the Imperial Japanese Navy. She'd be built throughout the rest of 1912, all of 1913, and she'd be launched on March 28, 1914. After this, she'd undergo sea trials and fitting out, being completed in November of 1915. She was commissioned on November 8, 1915, being assigned to the 1st Division of the 1st Fleet on December 13th. Before we get too much further into her story, let's look at her specs. Fusō was a Fuso-class dreadnought battleship that displaced 29,330 long tons standard and 35,900 long tons fully loaded. She was 665 feet long overall, 630 feet 3 inches long at her perpendiculars, had a beam of 94 feet 2 inches wide, and a draft of 28 feet 7 inches deep. Her complement when completed was 1,198 officers and enlisted, though after a later refit, this would be upped to around 1,900. As for propulsion, she was equipped with 24 Miyahara water tube boilers powering 2 Brown Curtis direct drive steam turbine sets capable of producing 40,000 horsepower, which in turn powered 4 propellers. With this setup, she could achieve an average speeds of 23 knots, and she had a range of 8,000 nautical miles when traveling at 14 knots. Now, let's look at armament and armor. As for armament, she had 6 twin-mounted 14-inch guns, 16 single-mounted 6-inch guns, and 6 21-inch torpedo tubes. As for armor, she had waterline belt armor that was between 9 and 12 inches thick, deck armor between 1.3 and 2 inches thick, and barbette armor between 8 and 12 inches thick, and conning tower armor that was 13.8 inches thick. She'd undergo a major refit in 1944, and we'll cover the changes when we get there. Building the ship was backbreaking work. And sitting on your wallet can be backbreaking for you. Do you find yourself sitting on a chunky wallet in your back pocket causing hip and back pain? And ladies, is your wallet so fat you have to have a purse for it? Well, look no further. Ridge wallets are flat and sleek so they fit in your front pocket, protecting your posture and saving you from back pain. Not only this, but they are made from incredibly strong carbon steel and come in a variety of gorgeous colors, including your favorite NFL football team's livery and customization options. Not only this, but Ridge wallets have RFID blocking technology to prevent electronic pickpocketing and credit card theft. My husband is so jealous of my Ridge wallet, he's begging for me to get him one. If you want to hold your cards in cash and style like me, check the cards to visit Ridge and use my code YouTube10 at checkout to receive a 10% discount on your order and help support my channel. Thank you so much, Ridge, and now it's time to continue with Fusō's service history. Though World War I had already begun on July 28, 1914, Fusō would not take part in the conflict after her commissioning on November 8, 1915, as there were no longer any forces of the Central Powers in East Asia by the time she was ready. Instead, she patrolled off the coast of China during this time. She did serve as the flagship of the 1st Division during 1917 and 1918, and during her period in reserve in 1918, 5 76.2mm anti-aircraft guns were installed on the ship. Following the events of the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, she'd aid survivors from September 9th to the 22nd. During the 1920s, we don't really know what she was doing, but we do know she conducted training off the coast of China and was often in reserve. The first phase of the ship's modernization began on April 12, 1930 at the Yokosuka or Yokusuka or however you say it Naval Arsenal. I've seen compelling arguments for both in the comments. I've heard both online when looking for accurate pronunciations. I just don't know anymore. You'll probably hear a mix of both moving forward. At this mysterious naval arsenal, Fuso's machinery was replaced, armor was reinforced, and her torpedo bulges were fitted. Fuso arrived on September 26, 1932 at Kure Naval Arsenal, the one I can say, and here her armament was upgraded and her torpedo tubes were taken out. Her sea trials after this refit began on May 12, 1933, and the second phase of her modernization began less than a year later. Her stern was lengthened, and this work was done by March of 1935. She was sporadically used for training for the next 2 years, and afterward, Fuso was assigned as a training ship in 1936 and 1937. Fuso began the first phase of her second modernization on February 26, 1937, as Japan just couldn't stop picking at this ship, and this was completed on March 31, 1938. The Empire of Japan invaded China on July 7, 1937, and oftentimes I forget to mention this, but it can be counted as the beginning of World War II and is by some historians. The Marco Polo Bridge incident was the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War, which is a precursor to World War II and leads us right into it. Fuso was once more assigned to the 1st Division of the 1st Fleet on November 15, 1938, and she briefly operated in Chinese waters in early 1939. World War II officially began in Europe on September 1, 1939 with Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland. The second phase of her second modernization began on December 12, 1940. This was completed on April 10, 1941, and Fuso was assigned to the 2nd Division of the 1st Fleet. At this time, the division only consisted of Fuso, Yamashiro, and the 2 Ise-class battleships Ise and Hyuga. There was a lot of shuffling around, remodeling, and modernization for her throughout the 1930s. World War II would begin in the Pacific following the Imperial Japanese Navy's attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 near Honolulu, Hawaii. This instantly enraged the Americans, and they jumped into World War II with both feet. During this time, Fuso and her division, reinforced by the battleships Nagato and Mutsu and the light carrier Hosho, sortied from Hashirojima to the Bonin Islands as distant support for the 1st Air Fleet attacking Pearl Harbor, and they returned 6 days later. On February 21, 1942, she returned to the Kure Naval Arsenal to replace her gun barrels, and she departed on February 25th. Fuso and the rest of the 2nd Battleship Division pursued the American carrier force that had launched the Doolittle raid on April 18, 1942. However, they did not get close enough to engage. The 2nd Battleship Division and Fuso set sail on May 28, 1942, with the Aleutian Support Group. At this same time, most of the Imperial Fleet began an attack on Midway Island, Operation MI. The division, commanded by Shiro Takasu, was comprised of Japan's 4 oldest battleships, Fuso, Yamashiro, Ise, and Hyuga, as well as 2 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 2 oilers. Official records don't show this division as part of the larger Midway operations known as Operation AL. Instead, they were to accompany the fleet under the command of Vice Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, but were only to provide support to the Aleutian Task Force if necessary. Turns out they weren't needed. On June 14th, Fuso returned to Yokosuka and arrived at Hashirojima on June 24th. The Battle of Midway had been a disaster for the Japanese, and they lost 4 aircraft carriers. To quickly replace these carriers, it was originally planned for Fuso and Yamashiro to be converted into battle carriers. Instead, Ise and Hyuga had this honor. Fuso was assigned to the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy at Edajima, Hiroshima, for use as a training vessel between November 15, 1942 and January 15, 1943. On June 8, 1943, Fuso was in Hashirojima when the number 3 turret aboard Mutsu suddenly exploded, causing the ship to capsize and sink. Fuso rescued 353 survivors from this ship after the explosion. Between July 18th and the 24th of 1943, she was at the Kure dry dock for the fitting of radar and additional 25mm anti-aircraft guns. She sailed from the inland sea on August 18th for Truk Naval Base, bringing supplies, and she arrived 5 days later. The Japanese had intercepted American radio traffic suggesting an attack on Wake Island, and on October 17th, Fuso and the bulk of the First Fleet sailed for Eniwetok, positioned to intercept any attack there. The fleet arrived on October 19th, left 4 days after this, and arrived back at Truk on October 26th. On February 1, 1944, Fuso and Nagato departed Truk to avoid an American air raid, arriving at Palau on February 4th. They left here to avoid yet another air raid on February 16th, and they arrived at Linga Island on February 21st. Here, Fuso was employed as a training ship. She was refitted at Singapore between April 13th and the 27th and returned to Linga after this. On May 11th, she was transferred to Tawi-Tawi and provided cover for the convoy that failed to reinforce Biak Island at the end of May. She then transferred to Tarakan Island off Borneo to refuel in early July of that year before heading back to Japan, escaping an attack by the submarine USS Pomfret. In early August, she was again at Kure, and here she was refitted with additional radar systems and light AA guns. Fuso and Yamashiro were then transferred to Battleship Division 2 of the 2nd Fleet on September 10, 1944, and she became the flagship of the division under the command of Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura on September 23rd. On September 23rd, they left Kure for Linga, escaping an attack by the submarine USS Place the following day. They arrived at Linga on October 4th, and Nishimura transferred his flag to Yamashiro. The ships then transferred to Brunei to refuel in preparation for Operation Show Go, the attempt to destroy the American fleet conducting the invasion of Leyte. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was about to begin, and our lovely members are only getting started. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, my friends, let's get into the Battle of Surigao Strait and Fuso's sinking. Fuso left Brunei at 3:30 p.m. on October 22, 1944 as part of Nishimura's southern force, heading east into the Sulu Sea and then northeast into the Mindanao Sea. They were intending to meet up with Admiral Takeo Kurita's force in Leyte Gulf, so they passed west of Mindanao Island into Surigao Strait, where they met a large force of American battleships and cruisers waiting for them. The Battle of Surigao Strait would become the southernmost action in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and it would be Fuso's last. At 9:08 a.m. on October 24, 1944, Fuso, Yamashiro, and the heavy cruiser Mogami spotted a group of 27 planes from the carrier USS Enterprise. A bomb from one of them destroyed the catapult and both float planes that Fuso had installed in 1944. Another bomb hit Fuso near turret number 2 and penetrated the decks, killing everyone in the number 1 secondary battery. Fuso began to list 2 degrees to starboard already. Early the next morning on the 25th, Fuso opened fire around 1:05 a.m. after seeing a shape spotted off the port bow. Unfortunately, this turned out to be Mogami, and Fuso's friendly fire killed 3 sailors in Mogami's sickbay. 2 long, tense, and uneventful hours went by before the firefight would start up again. 1 or 2 torpedoes, possibly fired by the destroyer USS Melvin, hit Fuso amidships on the starboard side at 3:09 a.m. on the 25th. She slowed down, listed to starboard, and fell out of formation. According to some Japanese and American eyewitnesses, Fuso apparently broke in half, and that both halves remained afloat and on fire for an hour, but they specifically mentioned the enormous fire on the water and not any details of the ship itself. Historian John Toland agreed in 1970 that Fuso had broken in 2. However, according to historian Anthony Tully in 2009, quote, "Survivors' accounts in the USS Hutchins report are describing a sinking an event at odds with the conventional record, one that seems far removed from the spectacle of the invariably alleged huge magazine explosion and blossom of light at 0338 that supposedly blew the battleship in half. Fuso was torpedoed, and as a result of progressive flooding, upended and capsized within 40 minutes. Fuso sank between 3:38 a.m. and 3:50 a.m., releasing a large quantity of oil which ignited on the surface as she went down. Only a few dozen men survived the rapid sinking and subsequent oil fire, and what happened to these men is on another level of suck. Some were rescued by the destroyer Asagumo, which was sunk just a short time later, and so some of them probably died here as well. It's possible others happened to reach Leyte, only to be killed by Filipinos, which was known to have happened to survivors from other Japanese warships sunk in the Battle of Surigao Strait. 10 crew members are known to have survived, and they all returned to Japan. The total number of casualties is estimated at 1,620 sailors. Fuso was struck from the Navy list on August 31st, 1945. As for her wreckage, RV Petrel discovered the wreck of Fuso on November 25, 2017. She lies upside down in 607 feet of water and is in one piece on the seabed, with the hull broken amidships from the impact with the bottom. This completely debunks the myth that she remained split in half for an hour. The pagoda mast of the ship broke off during the sinking and is some distance away from the wreckage. She lies at the bottom with multiple other Japanese ships sunk at the Battle of Surigao Strait, a battleship that did little other than travel with her fleet. I will be taking some time off at the beginning of the new year, so there will not be a Fast Facts Friday or Shipwreck Sunday episode next week. However, I will be back on January 10th and 12th like normal. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you next time.